Russian banks are collapsing today because Putin's aggression has led to a national depression. Russians no longer trust the system they live in. This financial panic is existential. Citizens are pulling money out of banks at record levels, forcing the Kremlin to implement draconian capital controls and banning gold exports altogether. This fear is rooted in 1998, when the Russian economy collapsed overnight and Russian banks literally shut down. This forced the Kremlin to beg Washington and the IMF for a bailout. Now, Putin is actively pushing Russia back to that crisis point. He's running a debt spiral by forcing banks to issue bad loans to his failing companies. This leaves banks on hooks when these companies fail. To delay the inevitable, Putin has one solution: tyranny. He's now forcing Russians to stay inside Russia, and he's banning them from taking their money out. Putin is trying to rebuild the Soviet Union. I truly mean that. Take a look at this reaction from a Chinese tourist who went to Russia and was just completely shocked at how bad the Russian economy truly is.
Hey folks, I'm strolling through the streets of Russia right now. Wanted to chat today about what life costs here. Russia's gotten really pricey these days. Not sure if you've heard. I just shelled out for a month's parking. 3,600 rubles. Parking in this residential spot runs that much every month. Weirdly enough, it might even top what some teachers pull in monthly. From what I've heard, local elementary teachers make around 20,000 to 30,000 rubles a month. But get this, I just looked, and the parking alone tops that. And don't get me started on water. I just grabbed a bottle for 250 rubles. What the heck? Everything's ridiculously overpriced, thanks to the war. Folks here have it tough too. Inflation's hitting hard and taxes are sky high. Putin's government is funneling tons of cash from everyday folks to fund the war. Doesn't seem like many are motivated to hustle. Just some thoughts from my time in Russia. Drop comments if you've got them. Catch you next time.
Well, what if I told you things are about to get worse? Take a look at this. Just a few months back, in May in fact, Russian economists were warning Putin that Russia was heading towards a systematic banking crisis. Well, it looks like it's here. You see, one of the biggest problems with modern banking is trust. A banking crisis is kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If people think that bank will not be able to pay them back their money, well, soon that thinking becomes a reality. That's because the whole system is built on trust. And trust is something that's severely lacking in Russian society right now. Russians have pretty much stopped depositing money into banks, and that's a huge problem already. But that's only half the problem, and not even the bigger half or important half. The other half is that Russians are pulling money out at record levels. Take a look at this data that was published by Russian officials. In June, cash withdrawals in the country hit 216 billion rubles. July, it was pretty much the same. Then it stabilized a little in August, and in October, it's already at $180 billion. And we are only 20 days into the month. Those are record levels for the Russian economy. But it's important to point out that we're seeing these numbers when Russian interest rate is at 17%. You see, one of the benefits of having such a high interest rate is that people save a lot because they're getting such a crazy return on their savings. But in Russia, even with 17% interest rate, which was, by the way, 20% just a month ago, Russians are pulling out money at record levels. Russians just don't trust the bank and they don't want to keep their money in there. Now, this problem has been compounded by Putin's desire to tighten his grip on Russian society. You see, we have talked about this in our previous videos, but he has used the excuse of Ukrainian drones to crack down on Russian internet. He says that Ukraine is using Russian internet to basically aim the drones towards what they want to aim at. But the reality is, even when Putin shuts down the internet, Ukrainian drones are still hitting their targets. So it's not like he's really stopping Ukrainian drones. But what he's really doing is he's stopping Russians from talking to each other. That's why it's almost impossible to use Telegram or WhatsApp inside Russia to make a call. And these are very popular apps. Now, according to Kremlin officials, if you're having trouble with Telegram or WhatsApp, just download this new app called Max. But Russians know that there's something fishy about this app. And they're right. This is designed by Kremlin, and Putin can see everything that Russians are talking about. That's why they're not happy with what's going on. And we have actually seen some young Russians protest about this new law that Putin is trying to force onto everyone. Well, you see, the thing with the economy is everything affects everything. And that means when Putin decided to shut down the internet to increase his tyranny, people started pulling their money out of banks because in a digital world, you kinda need the internet to do a transaction. If Putin is gonna keep messing with the internet, well, people are saying maybe we should just keep cash at home. Now, when people start doing that, when they start pulling out so much money from the bank, that's not good for any economy. But for a war economy, that's even worse news. That's because, believe it or not, you need money to fund wars. And you need loans to get your war economy going. That's why when Putin launched his special military operation back in 2022, he forced Russian banks to start giving out preferential loans to companies who were supporting his army. Basically, manufacturing companies, mining companies, metal, steel, that kind of stuff. And what I mean by preferential loan is basically banks were forced to give out loan even when they thought the company should not get this much amount, or they believed that company just shouldn't get any money. Sometimes some of these companies are just too risky to loan to. But when the war started, banks didn't have a choice. They had to give money, and they had to do it if they wanted to keep operating in Russia. Well, I'm sure you have noticed if you've been watching our videos last few weeks, but a lot of Russian companies are collapsing right now, to put it politically, I guess. They're laying off a lot of people, they're cutting down on work hours, and they're literally begging banks to extend the loans because they're not going to have money to pay whatever they owe at the end of the year. So this is when banks are facing a huge problem because they're dependent on this loan to guarantee the deposits that they have, and now people are pulling out their money, and the companies that owe them money don't look like they can pay it back. This is where banks are going, hey, you forced us to give out these loans, now you gotta bail us out. So they're turning to the government to ask for a bailout. As the famous saying goes, world domination is not fiscally responsible, and Putin is learning that the hard way. And Russian officials are realizing that all their problems are leading to one root cause. As they say, all roads lead to Rome. And for Russia, all roads are leading towards the economy. Every problem can be traced back to the economy collapsing.
Meanwhile, a Kommersant source estimates the petrol shortage in Russia at 20% of standard monthly supplies. On business activity, in September, the activity of small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, was the lowest since the end of 2022. For the first time since December 2022, the RSBI index, which measures the level of business activity of SMEs, went into decline, falling below 50 points. More and more companies expect a drop in revenue, and the share of those who are denied loans has also increased. Entrepreneurs are in no hurry to invest in business expansion or hire new employees. What's more, demand for metal has fallen to its lowest level for many years. Over 10 months, demand for steel on the Russian market has decreased by 15%.
Well, Putin is doing what he has always done. Just 3 days ago, he seized another $500 million rubles from a Russian official. When I first saw this headline, I was like, damn, it pays well to be a Russian government official. But again, you can't be feeling bad for these guys, because I'm sure they're just as corrupt as Putin. But only thing that's changed now is Putin doesn't like them, so they're losing everything that they have saved up. Doesn't matter how they saved it up. But I want you guys to think about this a little bit deeper. What happens when headlines like this are going viral in Russia? What happens if you're a Russian oligarch who's seeing headlines like this almost every single week? Someone new is on the chopping block every week because Putin needs money to keep his war going. Well, if you're an oligarch or an elite, You want to move your money out of Russia as quickly as possible, and then you want to move out of Russia as quickly as possible. Now, sanctions, of course, make it harder for oligarchs to do all this, but they have their ways. One of the easier things they're doing is they convert their assets or their liquid assets to gold bars, move them outside Russia, and then they sell it to basically move their money out. Well, Putin is catching on. Because take a look at this. Russia just limited moving gold out of the country to 100 grams per person, which really isn't a lot. That's around like $15,000 based on the race right now. For an oligarch, that's like 1 hour of jet fuel. Not enough for them to leave Russia, especially considering the lifestyle they're used to. And on top of this, just 2 nights ago, Russian Duma also gave Putin a new power. He now has the right to ban any foreign currency transactions that Russian can do. Meaning, if he says, hey, Russians cannot trade their rubles to USD, anyone who tries to do that in the future will be now criminally accountable. Just another way for him to steal more money and claim that it's all within the law. As the famous saying goes, for my friends, everything, and for my enemies, the law. All this points to one thing. Putin does not want Russians to leave, and he does not want them to leave with the money they have. Maybe this is the new Iron Curtain. For Russians, all this means one thing. Life continues to go downhill. Government keeps coming up with new taxes to slap on everything so they can basically make more money. Beer prices have hit a new high because more taxes were announced on beer. And the government is also cutting down on social programs that they have offered for all these years. We already see this happening in some Russian regions where they have cut payments to pregnant schoolgirls. All the while, Putin is asking everyone to have more babies so he can send them to the front lines. We have also seen other Russian regions who are just not paying their teachers. Now, I know Putin doesn't care about the future of the country, but maybe some Russians should, because teachers are basically teaching the future leaders and future Russians. And lastly, of course, Russians do have one outlet. They can always just take more medication. Since 2022, when this war was first launched by Vladimir Putin, this year has been the highest in terms of how much antidepressant Russians are buying. I guess that tells us a little bit about how the economy is going. That's all I have for you guys. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe button down below if you enjoy these updates, and I'll see you guys next time.